NDTV is reporting from ground zero in Ukraine. We're being joined by Vishnu Shom. He is, in fact, at ground zero in the capital city of Kyiv. What really is the situation on the ground at the moment, Vishnu, and where are you?
Well, I'm in Kyiv at the moment. It's been a 16-and-a-half-hour journey from Warsaw in Poland through the night, involving a transfer of buses with very strict instructions. You know, don't film here or there. In fact, don't look here or there either as the bus goes down the road. We just reached about a little while back, and a little bit more than an hour back. We are here broadcasting for you. What I can share with you, and what we'll bring you video of tomorrow when we actually go into the areas affected, countless tanks of the Russians completely obliterated. We saw all of those in the Irpin area, which we drove by very closely. Irpin, one of the areas which was hit very hard by Russian artillery and Russian bombing and Russian rocket attacks. We also saw dozens of armored personnel carriers, but very concerningly, we saw any number of homes completely destroyed, factories completely destroyed, warehouses completely destroyed. This was the route that the Russians actually followed to exfiltrate from this area. But if that's one part of the story which has been very widely reported now over the last few days, the fact of the matter is that there are huge concerns now about what is happening several hundred kilometers away from here, nearly 1,000-odd kilometers away in the southern port city of Mariupol, where there are reports, and these are Ukrainian allegations, that the Russians have used drones to fire chemical weapons, and that these are causing breathing difficulties for their soldiers on the ground. It also comes at a stage when the Ukrainians have started saying that their soldiers are now making a final stand in Mariupol. So that's a very important development over here. The city of Mariupol completely destroyed, completely obliterated at this juncture. The Ukrainians waging a steady defense, but it appears that it's going to be very hard going in that particular area. But the broader picture of the war itself is that this appears to be a real lull before the storm, and that storm is going to be near the Mariupol area, to the east of it, and going all the way up north to south of, let us say, the major city of Kharkiv. The Russians want to push west from the Donbass area, and the Ukrainians want to hold them where they are and in fact push them back. That is the front line where the battle might be fought in a very major way in the next couple of days, if not weeks.
Will the focus then shift to the east now, Vishnu? What are you picking up? What's the sense you're getting?
Well, there are two aspects of the story. What we can report over here, and what we will, I should be in Bucha tomorrow, for example, the village which is, the township which is synonymous with human rights violations, with children being raped, with executions having taken place, and a lot of evidence having emerged of that. And what the Russians have left behind in their path as they withdrew after essentially being defeated in this particular axis. So that's one part of what we don't really know what else has taken place. We should be able to know in the next couple of days. But in terms of what Russia's ambitions are going forward with this war, it's not over with what they couldn't achieve here on the Kiev front. It is very much in the Donbass region, several hundred kilometers to the east. What the Russians want to do is that they want to pin Ukrainian forces in a couple of important cities in that area, and then perhaps using an armored thrust in their tanks and their armored personnel carriers and their battalion combat groups move through a thrust westwards, not the entire country, but just enough where they feel that they are in a position to hold the Donbass. It's not often understood that the finest and the largest number of Ukrainian soldiers are those who are deployed on the Donbass front. There were defensive operations over here, obviously, and in other cities, but the real bulk of the Ukrainian forces, and it's a very large army, you know, I mean, it's among the largest in Europe, that's deployed on the Donbass front. What happens next? Let's see what happens. Hopefully there will not be more bloodshed as we've seen over the last 40 plus days.
Right. Vishnu, also, since you have managed that long journey and you're reporting from ground zero in Kiev, get us a sense of what really is the situation in Kiev, because if we just look at where you're standing, for instance, it looks like a busy junction. There's traffic moving as normal. From where you're standing, it doesn't look like anything really has happened in Kiev.
In fact, that is absolutely correct. There are parts of Kiev. The part where I am right now is Maidan Square. It's the heart of Kiev itself. It is the center of, in a sense, Ukraine's identity. If there was any particular location, it is this. This area has not been hit. But if I was to drive 15 minutes down the road, or about 20 minutes down the road, I would be in areas where massive shopping malls were obliterated by Russian missile attacks. What the Russians couldn't do is drive their tanks down Maidan Road, and that's what they wanted. In fact, these defenses that you see around us, and I don't know how much longer they're going to be here, these are tank traps. They're essentially meant to ensure that tanks don't cross over. And it was over here on the outskirts of Kiev that the Russians fought their battle, and the Ukrainians won their remarkable victory. And that's because of the weaponry they used, the ambush tactics they used, the logistics problems which the Russians encountered. But to answer your question, there are signs of Kiev returning to a semblance of normalcy, but I would suggest it's still a ways away. The destruction all around the city is absolutely incredible. And if there is a battle or a further extension of the war in the Donbass region, then the economic consequences of that will be felt not just over here in this city or in this country, but certainly will continue to be felt across Europe.
Well, two other important developments, Vishnu, as you're reporting from Ukraine. One, that President Putin is meeting with Lukashenko, his Belarusian counterpart today. Important bilateral that's taking place in the light of what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, that is an important process, but do remember the role played by Belarus. And do remember the role played by Russia, the fact that Belarus is widely seen to be more than just an ally, essentially an extension of Russia, in the sense that Russian forces have operated with impunity from Belarusian territory. They have moved south from that particular area. In fact, the entire advance to the Kiev access, to the Kharkiv access, and to the Sumy access, to the Chernihiv access, that's further north from where I am right now, has all come from Belarus. And so it is an extension, many would suggest, certainly from a security standpoint, of the Russian state itself. So those talks are important, and one would want to know if Vladimir Putin is looking in these talks to figure out a way, in terms of a solution which can be offered perhaps to the Ukrainians, because at this juncture, the Ukrainians have very clear offers which they put in a draft and they've sent to the Russians. The Russians have their idea of what constitutes a victory as well. Ultimately, if the goal is peace, then that peace process would have to involve Belarus as well.
Well, not very long ago, it was almost believed that, the ground had been laid for the Ukrainian president and the Russian president to actually meet in person, and arrive at some kind of a peace deal. But what we are hearing Zelensky talk about in the last 24 hours is fears that Russia might go ahead and use chemical weapons, even urging the European Union to step in and put in more sanctions to prevent that from happening.
In fact, that's a very important point, because the allegations made by Ukrainian forces is that the Russians have already done that in Mariupol, where apparently drones from Russian forces were used to disperse chemical agents, and that Ukrainian soldiers on the ground are finding it difficult to breathe. Now, this has to be corroborated, because if there is an extension of this warfare to include chemical weapons, then that marks, the next step up in the lethality or in the danger or the macabre element that warfare actually brings with it. It's a sickening way of dying, let's put it rather bluntly, if chemical weapons are used. In many cases, you just are unable to breathe and you suffocate. In other cases, the death is even more painful and more horrific. But in areas which have a strong resistance, where you are unable to get through to the defenders, then that is an option which does exist. But one would only hope that there is some sort of sense which prevails where this doesn't escalate into the use of chemical weaponry. But the Ukrainians, at least some, are saying that that is something that may already have happened. The international community looking at it very, very closely indeed. Where does the peace process, or where do the talks actually stand between Ukraine and Russia at this stage? Well, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has said all along that he wants to meet face to face with Vladimir Putin. Putin hasn't disagreed on that as yet, but they were moving in that direction. But both sides need to figure out their drafts, come to some sort of a conclusion, and then, look at a possible peace. I think what the optimism that we were reporting about a week, 10 days back, has somewhat died down now, with clear evidence of the Russians massing their forces in the Donbass region.
All right. Well, Vishnu, thanks very much for joining us with all those live updates from Ground Zero in Kiev. We look forward to your report. Stay safe, and we'll come back to you for more updates. Vishnu there joining us live from Kiev, reporting on the horrors of the war in Ukraine.